as I said, it's a complete distraction. Joe Nesbo. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you for joining us, virtual audience. I wanted to start tonight. I'm so happy to see Mike again. We have been together, I think, for all of your books, haven't we?
Just about. Oh, yep, just
Sorry,
about.
I think so, because the drone books, at least two of the
Two of
drone
the drone
books.
books, all four of the Tom Clancy books.
Right.
This is my third Clive Cussler.
And the Cusslers, right. So anyway, it's been delightful. What I found...
It makes me an institution.
Well, whatever. What I found while doing some house cleaning up was this wonderful cover, original cover here. And both Clive and Dirk signed it for me. And maybe you will remember, it's called Arctic something. Thank you. All right. So anyway, I thought that it would be a good idea to present it to the bookstore. And I thought I'd do it tonight while Mike was here. So, but you never actually wrote with Clive, did you?
No, I never had a chance to, unfortunately. In fact, I never even had a chance to meet him. So,
I thought perhaps you had met him, but
no. But he was a real blessing to me. My very first book, Drone, he actually wrote a blurb for it.
That's true. He did.
Yeah, so that was such a thrill that he did that for me. I mean, it just blew my mind. Of course.
He was a very generous guy. He loved to read, and he did read books that were sent to him to review instead of just kind of, passing them off. Anyway, I don't know where we are going to hang it, but I thought it would be fun to present it tonight while Mike was here.
Very cool.
Thank you, Mike. Have a seat.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, to relieve Mike's, they don't do advanced reading copies very often anymore. And so some readers, so Mike will believe it when I say I was able to read it in time. And one of the things that I thought was helpful, because some of these locations are perhaps not going to be that familiar to you, and I found that it really helped to look them up so I could tell where, because you're sort of goes. So I'm assuming that you didn't actually go there, but maybe you did.
Not most of these places, no. Sometimes we try to travel as much as we can to the places that we write about, but sometimes in a cycle of books, we're building a house this past year. So that kind of took all of our time. But a lot of things that I wrote about, I've either studied or been very familiar with and been thinking about for a long time. But in terms of the actual physical locations, I wasn't able to get to some of them this time. Next book, a little bit different.
Excuse me, it's a lot of ocean and some small islands, so I'm sorry. Another thing about growing old is your voice tends to go on you, but anyway.
This story is less geographically dependent. It really is more about character and, like I say, in contained environments.
Yeah, no, I remember when Dirk wrote the book that starts in Tibet, I asked him, I said, why is a Cussler taking place in Tibet, up in the Himalayas? What's that? And he actually said to me, and it's true, he said, I picked it, he said, because I knew it was a place you'd never been. Because most of the time I have actually been to the places that you guys write about, but not this one. However, this book has some terrific technology in it, and Mike's earlier series, Drone Technology, there are super drones in this book. So was that fun for you to bring them back into play?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I really haven't gotten away from drone technology since the first drone book. It's, get a little wonky. There's a term, Revolution in Military Affairs, RMA. That term's thrown around a lot and probably abused, certainly by me. But something fundamentally changed when drone technology finally came into its own. And authors, even certainly generals and strategists who don't think about it very much are really off base, but a lot of writers were kind of late to that. They saw it as kind of a one-off or something that was maybe a fad, but drone technology is not just a part of the landscape, it is going to own the landscape. All forms of land, sea, and air combat are going to be dominated by drones, and unfortunately, not even just by drones, but by artificially intelligent drones. We're already seeing this in the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The Russians are launching Lancet drones with AI technology on board, and they are basically released from control. And the drones pick their own targets now, and pick the targets of their own choosing, of opportunity, and off they go. And that's a real change in the way that war is going to go forward. And it has to go that way because, oddly, war is an almost uniquely human activity, right? The purpose of war is to accomplish political means. So humans wage war to achieve their human ends. But ironically, humans are the weakest link in any combat system. You build a jet, you have to have oxygen, armor, and enough fuel to get them up and come home, and parachutes and ejector seats and the whole 9 yards. But when you no longer have a human being on board, you can now turn that aircraft far faster than any human can withstand physically, so no G-suits. You can send them one way on suicide missions. I know you all heard of suicide drones. Drones, no one cares if a drone gets captured as a POW. I mean, there's every physical and political and psychological advantage to drones over human activity in warfare, ironically. And I don't know if you ever saw the movie AlphaGo from several years ago. Basically, computers now, AI computers, can defeat any human being in any human game. So whether it's Go or chess, you can imagine. So think of all these strategy games that no human being can beat a machine at. Well, what if that machine was now the general, the admiral of the force that you're facing? Well, that's what's coming. So the machines are outthinking us, they think faster than us, and they are more lethal than we are and capable of doing more things. So this advent of drone technology and drone warfare is only going to accelerate. And that's really was the purpose of why I wrote this book, was to really put human beings pitted directly against drones in an intense environment. So really play out the possibilities and, frankly, the horrors of what that might look like. Because I think that's what's coming.
Yeah, well, we can certainly see from the news that with the use of drones, civilians, I mean, it used to be that it was army against army, but that's not really true anymore. You know, with drone targets and all, civilians are constantly in the battle.
Well, sadly, civilians have been part of the have been victims of this since, well, certainly World War I, but certainly starting World War II. I mean, civilians are now the target. And so, we firebombed Dresden and killed 120,000, innocent German civilians just to terrorize Germany into submission, which failed, by the way. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, very much demonstration projects. We've been terrorizing civilians for a long time before drones. What's really crazy now is, of course, if you followed the war at all, the whole sort of NATO concept, the whole sort of post-World War II concept is like big arrow warfare. Like you say, like it's almost like a football coach on a chalkboard. These big arrows that sweep here and go there, and just like we saw in World War II. But what are we seeing that's happening in the Ukraine-Russia war? Trenches. Trench warfare from World War I has come back. And so now, even though NATO planners think in terms of big arrows, the Russians don't. And the Russians, for all kinds of reasons, but with basically constant surveillance plus drone technology, you simply can't amass large armies and move them the way you used to. So it's a hellscape now. It's a drone hellscape over there.
Well, on a happier note, I don't know if you guys have had your roof inspected lately, but I'm here to tell you that the roofing company that we use uses a drone. And it's wonderful. I mean, they come and, they fly over your house with their drone and they point out everything that needs to be done. And so there are some, I think some of you, I might have said this before, when we were in Stockholm, some years ago, we were walking along the water going towards the old town, the Gamla, and there was this weird noise overhead, and we couldn't, so I looked up, and there was a drone, and it tracked us for a while, and it turned out there was some guy over, he was just having fun, but it was really creepy, to have this thing right over your head. And then we were on a cruise through the Northwest Passage, and some enterprising passenger, it was the first commercial cruise where you could go from Alaska up around Alaska and across the top of Canada to Greenland in the whole bit. Some guy brought a drone on board the ship, which apparently nobody noticed, and he wanted to use it for photography, and the captain stopped the ship, froze all the excursions, wouldn't send up any of the helicopters and all, sent the crew to confiscate the drone, and said, that it put so many things at risk in terms of the ship and navigation and, expedition helicopters and everything. So I think they've now adopted a no drone policy on cruise ships, but That,
Oh, you'll see that in lots of places. When we were in Sarajevo, we visited the mosque there.
yeah.
In what was it, 2018, I think it was, and there was a big no drone sign right there outside the mosque.
Oh.
So I guess there's a problem there too. So
Okay. So, as you know, Mike took over this series when Boyd Morrison decided to write medieval Clive Cussler adventures. They really are. They're fun with his sister. And basically, it really is Clive, in a medieval landscape going to Mont Saint Michel and doing other stuff. If you haven't read either of Boyd's books, they're really fun. You'd be very comfortable with them as Cussler fans. But the last thing that Boyd did was a 2-book thing with Clive. We had big conversations about it. And Boyd stayed on for an extra book because the plan was that he would sink the Oregon, remember? And then he'd rebuild it. So my question to you is, since this book is so much about the Oregon, did you follow the rebuild that Boyd did, or basically is this your own Oregon?
No. I definitely did follow him. I try to be very faithful. I've read every single of those books more than once. I have literally a series Bible. I know the different variations of the Oregon and what it's gone through.
Right.
And so because out of respect for the series, but more importantly, the readers, I want to maintain a consistency. So absolutely, the current Oregon configuration follows Boyd's configuration. There might be a few changes coming, but nothing severe.
All right.
It'll still be the awesome Oregon.
We're spending a lot of time in the Oregon in this book. I mean, a huge amount of this book is there at sea.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really, I don't remember being quite so much in the ship in previous books, and I really like that because it's truly amazing.
Well, the Oregon is a character. It really is. People love that ship, and usually it's a means to an end. Go from here to there. And I thought, let me just bring the Oregon forward a little more in the story. I mean, since it's a story about technology, there's nothing more technological than the Oregon. So definitely the Oregon plays an important role in this one, for sure.
I mean, multiple decks with multiple things going on, but there's also a very cool addition to the Oregon that a young woman brings on board. And,
yes.
And I love the way you describe it. So we should set up the story first before we do that. So the book opens with in World War II.
Well, it is a big story.
It is a big story.
It's a big story. And I think the meat of the coconut of this story is back to our conversation earlier, where it's Juan and Link are trapped on this remote Pacific island, and they're forced to partner with a band of cutthroat mercenaries. And they're all battling for their lives against a one-man drone army, not aware of the fact that there's actually a far deadlier weapon that's about to be unleashed by the world's most ruthless arms merchant, and really what will amount to a genocidal assault that will change the course of history as we know it. That's the core of the story, and lots of things lead up to that and go beyond it, but that's the core of it.
Right. So we actually start in Japan, and we think of the Nazis as doing dreadful medical experiments and so forth. But in your case, you've got, I think, I will say that Mike is a ruthless writer. Nobody is spared. I mean, you're really efficient, but you could he's almost brisk about dispatching people. But anyway, I thought that scene in Japan was particularly horrendous. And well done too, really great, and surprised because you don't think it's going to end the way it did.
Well, I think that's a compliment.
No, it's a very big compliment.
You vicious, vile writer, you.
No, I didn't say that. I said you were efficient.
Well, yeah, and unfortunately, it's really interesting, isn't it? How do you handle violence? How do you handle, even though it's fiction based on reality, real life horror? You don't want to shy away from it. You don't want to dwell on it, but it was a real thing, and that's the privilege of writing in fiction is that I get to live and talk with imaginary people all the time, which is, well, why don't I get invited
Better
to a lot
than
of
real
parties?
people much of the time.
Real, yeah. But I always try to ground my fiction in reality, and so going to historical truths, to factual truths about, say, drone technology or current wars or whatever. So I have as much reality as I can in there, because I think the purpose of fiction today, especially, is to tell the truth. Fiction is about the last place we can tell the truth. We're so divided now. We used to be a culture where we would disagree about things, but then go hang out and have coffee or cocktails together. Now it's like, if you don't agree with me, I hate you, and I want to cancel you and go away. And so now we're like completely separated. So if someone stands up and says, well, here's a truth, bam, you've just destroyed the conversation. But if you say, hey, have you read the latest Cussler? Awesome. Well, I could talk about those exact same truths, but in a fictional context, for some reason, people accept that more. So that's why I love being a fiction writer, especially a thriller writer, because when you're talking about thriller and action, you're talking about politics, you're talking about war, you're talking about the human condition, the human heart, and the reality of what's going on in the world now and before, and what the Japanese did in World War II in their experimental camps was a nightmare. But human history is full of that. But ironically, there are also things that came from that in terms of American foreign policy, which is discussed and won't be mentioned at this point because it's discussed in the book. But yeah, it's hard to write those scenes. It makes me realize how fallen the human condition is, how fallen I am. There's a school of thought that says any human being is capable of anything in the right circumstances. And so many people say, oh, no, not me. But I apologize, I can't remember the name of the book, but there's a story of a group of German police officers in World War II, just traffic tickets and, all the things that police officers do. Well, they were shipped off to the Eastern Front, and they became as vicious and vile and brutal as anyone. These weren't SS guys. These weren't, hardcore Nazis. These were average people. But put in that circumstance, they turned like everybody else. So it's scary. It's scary and it's frightening to think about that potential of evil in every human heart. But it's there. And so that's why I touch on it, but try not to dwell on it.
No, you don't. You move briskly along. I know, which I really like. So, so much of the World War II literature is European-centered. It's more about the Nazis or the Italians and all. And there have been some very good things written about the Asian theater, the Japanese theater, but not as much. And so, we're opening in World War II in Japan. And then we spring to the present day and go from there. And I must say, I was really, as I'm reading along briskly myself, wondering how the Japanese thing is going to ever tie into this book. And I'm not going to tell you whether it does or not, but pay attention. Anyway, yes, I doubt. Well, I was trying to be subtle, but what the hell. Anyway, tell us now that we know. Well, so what we have here is one of these supervillains, a guy who is called what?
Well, the title he goes by is The Vendor. He is not just an arms merchant, a merchant of death. He's also an arms manufacturer. And I sort of hate to say it, but you could write human history as the history of the people who make weapons. You'd be surprised how many conflicts in human history are not driven by necessarily political or strategic interests, but the fact that, oh, here's a weapon, and we can do something with it. Better still, or I should say more importantly, and here's a weapon we can sell. And that's unfortunate, but that's also one of those realities. So part of the reason why I write about The Vendor is just to sort of make a general comment that arms manufacturers very often are putting products out there solely for the sake of profit.
But didn't you think profiteering has always been a corollary of warfare?
Absolutely.
If you ever watch Foyle's War, have you watched is a magnificent World War II series written by Anthony Horowitz. If you've never seen it on television, I recommend it to you highly, called Foyle, F-O-Y-L-E, Foyle's War. And you could see in Britain that the British were, profiteering, preying on each other, while the larger conflict was going on.
Well, war is always big business. War is central to the survival of the state, so the state typically will deploy massive amounts of resources, including finances, into the prosecution of war, Well, whenever you put a giant pile of sugar in the middle of the room, here come the cockroaches. And that's what happens. You put a lot of money out there and people want a piece of that. You know, so we're still at the era. I still remember back in the 1980s, there was these arguments that, you know, like the one of the military, I think it was the Air Force, might have been the Navy, I think it was the Air Force, had like a $1,500 toilet. It cost $1,500 for one toilet because that's all that could fit in this particular plane, blah, blah. You've heard that kind of story before. Well, they're still doing that. They're still doing that. Those kinds of systems are still going on because who's accountable? Who pays for it? Well, okay, we'll just put it on top of that 32, 33, 34 trillion dollar national debt. So unfortunately, I say profits unfortunately drive war and politics, and not just in capitalist societies, certainly in socialist ones as well. So again, I just want to touch on some of those issues too in this book.
So the vendor, who, you know, is kind of like a remote villain through much of the book, is
shadowy.
Yes. Oh, shadowy. What a better word. Yes, not even remote, but shadowy. And he has an incredible arsenal of weaponry and other things that he can use. So that leads us to what is the Oregon prepared for, but who is the new person and what does she bring to... she's a great character.
Thank you. I like her too. She's awesome. Brought in a woman who also is a technologist, and she is, I don't want to give anything away here, but she has basically developed a deep water submersible with some incredible capabilities that the Oregon wants to test out. She's sort of the civilian side of the positive things about technology. So she's really like the anti-vendor in a way. I didn't say it that way, but that's really in my mind how that's set up. So everything that the vendor represents that's not good, Callie represents the other side that is good.
Can you describe her nifty invention a little more?
Well, yeah, it's a little thing called the Spookfish. It's just a deep water submersible that can go very deep, but then she has invented another technology that lets a drone move out from there to go even further. And the drone itself can do all the things that, say, a deep water welder would do, but of course, without risking human life. So back to that point of humans are the weakest link in a warfighting system. Well, humans are the weakest link everywhere, right? Divers in dive suits have to be protected and oxygen and the whole 9 yards. Well, send a drone down there. So that's kind of the concept. So using drone technology to save human lives, to enhance human lives, and to accomplish purposes. So.
But it's really cool because it has a sort of a bubble on the top that allows for... It almost reminds me of Jules Verne, you know, in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I thought there was some similarity there, but I love the idea. And it's the actual fish itself, not the
Spookfish itself, yes.
The
That's
fish
an amazing little
itself
creature.
has that same kind of configuration.
It absolutely does. Yeah, it looks like almost like this fish has like a glass bubble and it has two eyes that will go straight up, but can also come straight forward. I mean, it's a really crazy deep water fish. It's beautiful. Look it up sometime. It's very cool.
So speaking of fish, did you all read that the whale that, you know, people thought was a Russian spy? Apparently it had, you know, that it turns out that somebody shot it. I thought that it had died naturally, but I read this afternoon that they have now determined that somebody shot the whale. And I thought that's an interesting, you know, sort of harnessing technology to a living mammal. And no, I mean, was it really spying for the Russians, or was it just, you know,
the U.S.
an
Navy
innocent
was
whale?
using dolphins way back in the Vietnam War. All the world's navies, the major navies, have tried to train dolphins, whales, and other creatures to do things. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this unfortunate whale is no more.
No more. And really, I'm not trying to be cute, but in some ways, when the militaries went to something like, say, a dolphin to send in a charge, you know, to blow up a ship, that was their first nod in a way toward drone technology. How can we take humans out of this loop and find another system that's more efficient? And then, of course, ironically, in all of the drone technologies, the most efficient drones have been the ones that where scientists use what they call biomimicry. So rather than saying, hey, how do we build this drone? They say, well, let's look at how a bird flies. Let's look at how a fish swims. Let's look at how... And what they're finding is that, you know, within nature, there is a design, a purposeful, efficient design that humans simply can't beat. I'll leave it to you where you think that design comes from. But without question, by mimicking what is already in nature, this drone technology is moving forward exponentially.
All right, just a little refresher course on page 20 of this book. When this new woman arrives at the Oregon, I thought this was kind of worth thinking about. She says to Juan, "Why do you call you chairman?" And Juan replies, "We run the Oregon and its operations like a Wall Street company, not a military organization. In fact, our business operation is called the corporation. You need a better marketing department." "I don't disagree," Juan said, chuckling, "because I am the marketing department. I'm the chairman of the corporation. Linda's vice president. Max Hanley is president. You'll meet him later." But then, of course, we realized later on that there is a higher authority that Juan at least generally responds to, right?
Yes, that would be Langston Overholt IV.
Who turns out to be a pretty ruthless guy, too, if we didn't already know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Langston plays it cool, but yeah, he's old school CIA. He's old school. By the way, he's going to make an interesting appearance in the next book, too. In a different iteration. Yeah, I think Langston's one of the really interesting characters, for sure.
No, I do, too. And, most of these thrillers that have people operating sort of not officially as the CIA, whatever, they all have their own kind of names and their own financing and their own, think about Sigma Force for Jim Rollins or Brad Taylor. I'm trying to remember what's Brad's called. It's another name. But, so Clive invented more than one, but, he's got Numa. But now the Oregon has got a different kind of organizational line. And
yeah, it's interesting. I think it all goes back to the idea of there are, at least since the Church Committee, in theory, there are limits on what the CIA can do. There are limits on what the CIA can do. And so fictionally we say, then we need to create organizations that are extra legal, that are outside of the restrictions of the CIA, and so they can do the things that the CIA would have traditionally done, in quotes.
Exactly. They're sort of a black ops operation of our own. And
it would be interesting if someone would go through and count up all of those other organizations and all the books. There's probably like 7,000 of these organizations now and one CIA.
Right. Well, we did a lot of events this summer with this kind. So Brad Thor has, one operation and Rollins had another. And, it's just interesting that, and I think part of it is that you can't really write one of these groups if it were, in fact, an official part of the CIA, because then you'd be ringed around by all the bureaucracy. And not only that, they wouldn't let you write the book, or they'd read it and take everything out of it.
Well, if you were a former member of the CIA, there would definitely be restrictions. Someone like myself, I would probably be okay.
Yep.
But it does raise an interesting question. Are all these kinds of organizations really in existence?
Exactly.
Or is the CIA actually doing this stuff? Because we know lots of things are going on in the world that we're not privy to.
Well, what I thought was interesting was that it was our CIA that told the people in Vienna that there was going to be some terrorist act for Taylor Swift. And I thought to myself, how the hell did they know that? And they had warned Moscow and some other place earlier that there were going to be terrorist acts and were ignored. But the Austrians believed them. But the question was, how come they knew what was going to happen in suburban Vienna? Why does our CIA actually know that?
And yet, when a president is almost assassinated, somehow they have no knowledge.
Very odd.
Oh, and of course, then there's also JFK, and the fact that the CIA doesn't want those records released, even though all the principals are dead. So, yeah, what?
I know, that was supposed to be sealed for 50 years, if I remember, but 50 years has come and gone.
Well, in 1999, don't hold me to that date, but the Congress passed a law saying that the records must be released. It's a law. It's law. And so certainly President Trump, when he ran, said, I'm going to release them. He went to go release them, and Mike Pompeo showed up and said, mm-mm. And so he didn't. So now President Trump is running again on the platform of I will release those statements. In part, I think because RFK Jr. has joined the campaign, but we'll see. Every president has walked right up to that line, and they get cold feet and they turn around. So the CIA does not want that information released, and they say they had nothing to do with it. The FDA is not saying don't release it. The Department of Agriculture is not saying release it. But the CIA says don't release it. I'll let you draw your own conclusions.
Well, you can make up something to go with it. So one of the other things that I really enjoyed about the book is the lifestyle here on the Oregon. Callie, who is this new woman who has come with her fabulous underwater operation, Callie and Juan proceeded down the line, they've gone for lunch, and helped themselves to bacon-wrapped asparagus, smoked corn on the cob, stacks of something I can't pronounce called kabu ragag, which are paper-thin sheets of local Lamani bread. They drank fruit-infused Tahitian waters, and they could have had a really fabulous dessert. And it turns out that apparently they have some, cordon bleu chefs on board and access to incredible food. I won't even ask about food storage or how they manage to,
Well, they fly
restock
it in. They'll fly it in.
Is that
for
what
sure.
they're doing?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. They're gourmands for sure. It's part of the rationale. And again, this was the genius of Clive. I mean, he could have just said, operators or a ship, but he really created a world of the Oregon, as you all know. And, he's saying we have this crew, they sacrifice, they're away from home. So we're going to make life really pleasant on this ship. So amazing food, amazing facilities, amazing salary. They all own a piece of the corporation, so they're all going to be fabulously rich if they stay with it. It's a pretty cool concept, actually.
I think it's a great concept. I mean, it's really, truly team building. I mean, the lowest guy on the ship, whatever, is likely to retire a millionaire if he stays the course, So, I mean, this is where we go back to our official guy back at the CIA or the Pentagon, wherever he is, who appears to have an unlimited budget.
Well, and the
Overall.
crew also, they also make money on this on other jobs too. So
Yeah.
it's not just, they don't work just for the CIA, but they'll never take a job that works against the interests of the United States government. But an emir can hire them for a position, or they'll do all kinds of other things.
So another factor is that if you have people who are operating in serious danger zones, you need to have a decent medical staff on board, right? You need to have a physician and medic and so forth. And there's some real physical toll taken on some of your characters in this book. You don't kill everybody. Sometimes you just maim them.
He's such a nice guy. He only maims them. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I struggle with as a reader like you, fans like you, are these scenes where, someone gets clocked in the mouth with a haymaker and they shake it off and get back into it.
Right.
No. So yeah, it's a fictional world, and I'm not going to do an episode of, House or something where we're seeing organ transplants, but I think it's important to show that there's damage, there's pain.
I agree, totally. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons this book, it's got real human beings in it, is they want to eat well, they get paid well, and they get hurt, which reminds me, what is with Juan's combat leg? Have I missed something over the years? Does he have an artificial leg? He does, because it vibrates. He's doing something, and at one point the leg starts vibrating, and his cell phone's in his leg, and I thought, okay.
Yeah, the combat. Pardon me? He's got almost like a closet full of them, right? He's got different kinds of legs for different circumstances, and some are, decorated with human hair. I mean, it's for whatever you want to do. But the combat leg is the one that always gets them out of trouble. It's again, thank you, Clive Cussler, for the combat leg, because you get in a place that you can't get out of. Well, there's always something in the combat leg. So
It's true. Sometimes it has a weapon as well as a cell phone. Oh, but anyway, I don't know that there's a lot we want to say much more about the plot, but I'm serious. I do recommend that you look up this part of the world, because it will make more sense. There's It's between the Philippines and Indonesia, and there's a lot of potential action could come from China, moving in that direction. And one of the things that I really loved was that I think it's the Oregon, not the bad guys deal, docks at one of these islands or pulls up alongside it and is able to shield the ship so that it looks like part of the island.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like perfect camouflage that it just looks as though it's, a bit of the rocky shore and the sand and the trees and all by the island. So what technology are we using there?
Well, the Oregon has always had the ability to camouflage itself, but
but
what I
how?
imagine was now you've got overhead drone technology, so now you've got overview. So if you're parked next to an island, why not mimic the topography of the island, and or the water? So because if the bad guys have drones, right, they're doing aerial surveillance looking for you, so now you've blended in perfectly. So
Yeah, but no, my question was, how does it camouflage itself?
there is a technology they have on board where basically the paint is like magnetic, and they can run electric charge through it, and they use a computer with pre-programmed, not scenarios. What's the term I want to look at? It has pre-programmed color schemes and whatnot, and so based on the flip of a button, you can change the color and of everything. And also even texture, so it can look like peeled paint or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, that's sort of mimicking some of the sea creatures, have an
Yes.
ability to do that themselves. They disappear into the coral or whatever
exactly
it is.
right.
So, it's amazing that Mother Nature is probably a better engineer than we are,
Oh, no question.
but
no
we
question.
may be catching up.
Well, we've also been engineered, so yeah, it's about time we catch up. And that's really is what's so fascinating about technology, isn't it? And I know in my previous book where we had sort of the super soldiers that have been modified genetically, so much of what human beings are trying to do now, we're trying to reinvent ourselves. We're trying to accelerate evolution in a sense. This idea where, at least in the Western tradition, the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, the Muslim tradition, human beings are made in God's image. Now we're sort of trying to make, ourselves into our own image of God. We're trying to make gods of ourselves. So the whole transhumanism movement is part of that. And in a way, the drone technology is just a different way to extend human power, human ability. I mean, if you think about what these drone technologies are doing in this perfect ISR, and by drone, that also includes satellites, by the way. It also includes hypersonic missiles. But if you think of like overhead satellites or overhead drones, you can see the entire battlefield all the time, day or night, infrared, heat signature. I mean, it's a very small g, godlike ability. So when you can see everything and where everyone moves, you've changed the game, right? I mean, so much of human warfare has been camouflage, hiding, trees, break up the line of sight. Those days are gone. And I don't recommend you do it, but you can go to Telegram, you can go to different places, and there is, I mean, they just call it war porn or drone porn, where you see these drones now just coming at these soldiers. Like you see the soldiers looking up and start crossing themselves and praying, and that drone comes straight down on them. Or you've probably seen them taking out tanks, taking out trucks full of soldiers. And that's the last thing you see. And what's really terrifying now, you talk about the back and forth of technology. Drones mostly are running off of what, like GPS, electronic signals, right? They're wireless. Well, the Russians are, I think, the world's greatest engineers right now in terms of battlefield electronic warfare. And so, but the Ukrainians are right there with them. And so they have these waves now of electromagnetic spectrum that are knocking down or blinding these drones. You think, okay, that's the end of drone technology. Nope. They're putting on these reels, sort of like Callies. Mm-hmm. They put on reels on the back of these aerial drones that can go 15,000 meters. And so what's scary about that is, so now you can't knock them down. So it's completely wire guided. And what's really scary now is, if you've watched the old 2 months ago drone technology, the camera, the pictures, have you ever seen them? They start to break up. They get kind of wonky just before they hit. It's because of the anti-drone electronic warfare stuff. Well, with these cables now, these optic cables, there's no distortion. And so you'll see these drones run right up into the face of a soldier before they're hit. And it's terrifying. You talk about terrifying. It's a terrifying environment. These young men are dying by the score. I mean, by some estimates now, at least 1,000 casualties a day on the Ukrainian side. And so much either by artillery or the hypersonic missiles or the glide bombs or the drones. I mean, technology is destroying a generation of Ukrainians. It's tragic.
I'm not sure I want Amazon to deliver anything to me by drone. You know, think about that. I'm okay with a roofer, but I don't think that, I don't think I really want packages dropped off there. But no, you're right. I mean, it is, there's all the stuff with AI. At some point, if you're going to, continue all this, you're going to have to deal with consequences of AI as well as drones.
Well, and sadly, I mean, there have been discussions for years. We need to have checks and balances. We have to have sort of a conversation about the morality of AI and drone warfare. And I mean, that sounds all great. The bad guys don't have those conversations. The bad guys say, no, let's shove AI in there and let's launch these things as fast as we can. And so you can sit back and say, well, I'm not so sure about the ethics of this. Boom. Suddenly your ethics go away. So the physics and the engineering, all of it is going to absolutely mandate and demand this drone-based AI-fueled drone warfare. And I don't see how you turn that back. I just don't, because the physics make perfect sense.
So do any of you have questions that you would like to ask Mike?
So it sounds like what Callie brings is sort of encroaching on Eric and Murph's territory. So are they in love or are they threatened by her?
We love love.
Okay.
The Oregon is the love boat, no doubt. Love boat with guns. Think of it that way. That's how I envision the Oregon. Well, I'll just say that there's a little romance in the air. Absolutely, you have to be a beautiful young woman with brilliant engineering mind. I mean, who's not attracted to that? So I'll leave it at that.
Anybody else? No, you're all stunned into silence.
The Oregon's propulsion system, when it was the very first book, it talked about how fast it could go and how it worked. And I understand some of that technology, but it doesn't appear like that has actually been commercially available.
Well, let's just say magnetohydrodynamic engines are a reality. They may not be as well designed as they are on the Oregon, as there are rail guns that have been designed, but the Oregons are better. There are lasers, but the Oregons are better. What can I say? The Oregon's just better.
You're not going to sink this one, are you?
I don't want to give away any secrets.
Ah, okay. I was really surprised when Boyd thought that he would do that. But
Yeah, Boyd was so genius on that one to build a counterfeit Oregon and have the two of them basically sink each other. That was just, when he did that, I thought, oh, you genius. I hate you. Really smart, really smart.
it was a 2-book operation, but nonetheless it was. But you're right. Now that you have the Oregon, you can upgrade it. You can do.
I can call
other
Boyd and
things
say,
to it.
Boyd, help me out here. Give me a good idea here.
Right.
Boyd
So
Morrison.
of the Cussler books, is this the one where not the people, but really the ship possibly is the lead character?
Oh, I'm not sure if it's the lead, but certainly absolutely a main character, for sure. But
I'm
for
trying
me,
to think.
the thing I really wanted to do in this story too is also get back to sort of just a gritty tactical situation. So often you run people in and you run them out, right? You do the mission, you get out. Well, this is where they're trapped on this island. There's no way off. And here comes your worst nightmare at you, hard and fast, 24/7. What do you do? I really wanted to push, especially Juan and Link, to their utmost human limits in the face of this daunting technology.
Well, I think you did an amazing job with it.
Oh, thank you.
This book really reads fast. which I've just demonstrated. No, but it really does.
Well, you read really fast anyway,
Well,
but
I understand that, but I mean, it's a really propulsive read. I think
Okay.
that the way the prose just really rockets you right through this story, and you also don't really want to put it down if you can help it. So, prepare for a sleepless night or start reading it in the morning or something. Really.
well, thank you.
Anybody else? Comment? No? Another one? You're sitting there.
Well, I just, you talk about all of this technology and you point out that it's real and it's here and it's terrifying. So, how do you live in that world without just kind of going, can't do it anymore?
Well, we live in the world no matter what. I mean, this technology is here, right? I mean, we live.
We don't know that. You know that.
I know.
Until you said it.
Well, see, and I'm back to my living with my imaginary friends, right? I mean, I've got vendors in my head. I've got villains in my head. I mean, that's the world I live in. Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, actually. I've always wondered, about Stephen King. I would never want to, hang out with Stephen King. I would think he'd be scary. I hope I'm not quite as scary. But yeah, I think about this stuff all the time. I really do, both in a fiction and a nonfiction sense, because I think it's important.
Yeah, but your scary is different than Stephen King's scary. Is much of it is supernatural or things that we can't really control. Mike's not writing that kind of thing, and so
But what's scarier? Something that is just completely made up, or stuff that's really real that's out there? I mean, it's a challenge.
it's a really good question. I still remember years ago somebody asked P.D. James at the only time she ever did an event for us about why she wrote books that could really frighten you, and she said, "What's better," she said, "than lying in bed and knowing that the step you hear on the stairs is not coming for you?" In other words, you can, in your own safe space, you can read a book that can take you to a dangerous place. So I think that, in answer to your question, it was hard for me to imagine ever being on the Oregon, trapped on this little island out in the Celebes Sea. And so maybe that's part of it, but that's different for somebody writing it and creating it, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Fiction writing is a form of entertainment, isn't it? And I think in our culture, the word entertainment has been devalued. If you take the etymology of the word, it means literally to enter into and attain or seize. And a great novel, a great writer will enter into and seize your heart, seize your emotions and your imagination and hold on and shake you hard. And what I've come to realize, and certainly your question reflects that happens to me too. I'm the first one who is entered into and seized by this thing that terrifies me, concerns me, worries me, bothers me. The human condition, another facet of it, faces me, which of course means what? It's also in me, right? I'm also a villain. I'm also a fallen person. I also need the kinds of redemption we see in these kinds of stories, if not more. So I love your question. It's a really important question, because a serious writer is wrestling with these things, and it doesn't let go.
Yes.
Are you going to do anything more with the lifeboats, or have they reached their maximum capability?
That's a really interesting question. The lifeboats are fascinating. I don't mean to sound like the ultra uber Clive Cussler fan, but I am. It's amazing what he came up with. It's like if he just said the Oregon, that'd be cool enough. But so many different aspects, and those lifeboats are crazy.
They're sports cars.
Basically, yeah, you're right. Yeah. I think everything's a sports car, actually, if you think about it, just on water, right? Because that's one of Clive's passions. Now, he was absolutely brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant in the constructions and the ideas. And that's why, for me, it's such a joy. when you're sitting down to write a brand new book and a brand new idea, I mean, you've got nothing, right? It's the blank page. It's the joy of the blank page, which anything's possible. But it's also the terror of the blank page because anything's possible. So what do you do? But I get to walk the decks of the Oregon, you know, and I get stuck for an idea. I go back through my notes or go back through one of the other novels and go like, oh yeah, and I can seize on that. So again, Clive Cussler, thank you. He, like I said, endorsed my very first book, and he's helped me write these. So I'm a blessed dude.
What got you started into writing?
Oh, that's a great question. I probably already had imaginary friends as a child. Maybe they prompted me into it. I don't know. The honest answer is I knew I was never a writer. I was not a writer. I couldn't write. I did nonfiction writing. That was kind of my background, academic background. Did a lot of that. But, you know, that's, you know, well, back in the day, go to the card catalog, right? Flip through it. I can do that. But people who made up stories, no way. But I graduated from college with 2 other guys who instantly started writing novels. I don't know why. I mean, they were like, they devoured books, especially sci-fi. So from 1983 to 2010, they were writing novels like crazy. They wrote 30 novels between them. And every year they'd say, hey, Mike, you need to write a novel. I'd say, why? You guys have never sold one. You're wasting your time. And laugh and hang up. And so, I mean, the publishing world, for whatever reason, the gatekeeper said, no, we don't want your stuff. We don't know who you are. Stay away. But they kept writing. And then one day, they discovered the interwebs. Have you heard of these? A thing called Kindle? And so back in the day when it was disreputable, when real writers didn't go on Kindle, they put their stuff up. And they put it up for $0 because no one knew who they were. And they get their stars, and they go to 99 cents, and they work their way up. Fast forward, they're multimillionaires now, and they sell hundreds of thousands of books that you've never heard of, but they have their fan base. But the point is, around 2010, when they started selling books, it's like, they said, you need to try this. Okay, I'll try one. And it was Drone. And was going to send it off to Amazon. A friend of mine who I was involved with the filmmaking community in the Dallas area. He's also a literary agent. I knew he knew the Amazon guys. Hey, could you just like send this to them, like get me to the head of the parade here and let them. He says, well, let me read it first. And so he read it. He says, let me try to sell this. I said, you're crazy. I read all the articles. I'm an unknown writer. You can't sell this. He said, let me try. He sold it. So another blessing, right? So that was great. So that's how I got started, sort of on a dare from my friends. But it's been a blast. It's just been a blast. It's so much fun. I still can't believe I pinch myself.
So what did you do while you were trying to be a writer? What kind of work did you do?
I worked for a nonprofit agency for the most part. I did a lot of things, but the thing I spent the most time just before I was writing was an organization called Community Connection. It was a nonprofit in the Dallas community and was working like in South Dallas and some of the disadvantaged communities, but when I'm getting connected, working with the artist community. And my partner and I, we heard about this thing called the 40-hour film festival, where you have 40 hours to make a film. And so one night we decided to do it. And we show up on a rooftop bar at midnight in Deep Ellum, and they gave you a prop and a line of dialogue and a location. Off you go, turn in a film in 48 hours. We never had so much fun. You had to write the film, shoot everything. We had no idea what we were doing, had a blast, laughed our heads off, and sort of failed miserably, but it was awesome. But at that point we said, no, this is crazy, because we found out later people were shooting films in advance, months in advance, and they'd show up that night and put in the prop and the line of dialogue and go to the location. Wrong. That's, cheating. I don't like those people. So we came up with the 8th Day of Creation Film Festival. So you had 8 days to make a 6-minute film based on a theme. So, for example, the first year was a C.S. Lewis quote from his book, Till We Have Faces. And the quote was, nothing is yet in its true form. And so off they went. But to answer your question more directly, I'm like, why am I talking to filmmakers and writers when I don't make films really myself or I'm not a writer? So I thought I better start learning how to do that stuff just so I can talk to folks. And that's when this door opened for me. I'm like, oh, okay. And God's great sense of humor. And I stepped, and here I am. And I'm glad to be here.
Accidental writer. I guess that could be your memoir, right? The accidental writer.
Yeah.
You know, people's journeys to writing are really so interesting. And the more life experience you have, the better it seems to work. You know, when you do start writing, you need, you need stories, you need characters, you need emotions, you need all kinds of things. It's fairly rare for a young person to be a really great writer just because they haven't lived along. There are some,
A few,
but
yeah.
they are rare.
They are rare, and they often can't sustain. So you think, of course, Orson Welles, right? I mean, at age 25, 26, said, "I'm gonna make the greatest movie ever made," and he did. But where do you go from there? You can't sustain that. So many geniuses and the great works of genius come to younger people, but it doesn't really sustain. Folks who come to it later, like you said, have the life experience or things to draw on to allow that career, to extend for a distance. Yeah.
Anyone else? So before we break up, Graham will be here on November 11th with a new book, and Jack will be back in May.
Oh, wow.
When I think I'm going to be in Nice, but anyway, or Salerno or somewhere. But anyway, Jack will be here, and I am not entirely clear when Dirk is coming, but I'm guessing it might be September next year, or are you already slotted in for September?
I think I might be.
Well, then he'd probably be the November book.
Yeah.
Or maybe he's going to sneak in while I'm not paying it. He might be March. Actually, now that I think about it, if Jack is made,
He
Dirk
might go to
be
Salerno
March.
or Nice.
He might, right. But I think it's really fascinating. I mean, I've been with Clive was with Clive for over 30 years. And I would never have guessed when I first started meeting Clive and working with Clive and all that, it would branch out in this way.
5 series. It's incredible.
Well, yeah. But I mean,
brilliant.
what he ended up doing was just phenomenal. I'm sorry, sir. I saw a hand back there.
Since you were talking about some of the authors, what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
do you know anything that's going on with the Fargo series?
It's not happening anymore. The woman who was writing it has a medical condition and could not continue, and there were several attempts to find other writers who might carry it on, and I think the decision now is that four series and 4 authors, at least for the moment, is kind of where it's going to stick. But nothing is ever for, absolute, and it may be that something will come along and reintroduce that.
And every writer is a reader. So every reader in here, I'm looking at you ladies. Come on now.
I'll find out from Dirk. I wouldn't be surprised because on that normal schedule there was a March book.
Well,
It was
people ask all the time, when's the next Fargo book? People love that series. So it'll happen at some point.
unfortunately, Robin can't write it, but
I know.
somebody else may write it. Anyway, November 11th for Graham, at which point I will know what will be happening with upcoming books. But, despite the fact that these are different writers in different series, it's still Clive, right? I mean, he is still,
Yep.
the line through that.
Yep.
And I think we were fortunate that he was only a few years older than I am, but I think he lived a long life, died at 89. I thought that he might actually continue into his 90s, but he just wore out.
Mm.
you know.
Well, he lived a life for sure.
He did live a life. We did an 80th birthday party for Clive at the Arizona Biltmore, in which there were all kinds of family photographs and all kinds of stuff that were contributed. And I have it all on a stick. And maybe when Dirk comes, maybe what we'll do is we'll show the whole thing to you, because if you weren't there, because it's Clive is a very young guy. It's Clive doing some of his daredevil stunts. It's his family, lots of different things. And I have held on to, I gave a copy actually to Dirk and both his sisters after Clive died. We made copies of them.
Good.
Yeah. But I think that might be a nice thing to do, would be to, I think Dirk would be the right person, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we'll look forward to that. So we've come to the part where normally we do a drawing and give books away, but since we had a thriller event Wednesday night, we actually have lots of books to give away, so everybody gets to have a free book tonight. So, and I have more in the bag because I wasn't sure how many to go. series is a really interesting author, but this is a standalone, exciting book. You, sir, I'm going to give this because you're looking for similar thriller writers, and this is Andrea Wilson, and we're taking over the Clancy. You get Brian.
Thank you.
Right. Right for you. I may need to go back, but fortunately we have more. So,